Greetings shippers, welcome back, and it's time to take a look at a ship that is both new and old, and takes certain shippers into unfamiliar and potentially odd territory, although for others, it just feels like home. We're going to be talking about the pairing of Eddie Brock and his symbiote, in a pairing that had two ship names vying for dominance, Venom and Symbrock. It appears that Symbrock has currently won that at the time of this recording, which saddens me a little. I was rooting for Venom. Also, at the time of this recording, during this week, this pairing managed to dethrone Clance on Tumblr's Fandometrics, and that's a hard thing to do. Clance has been pretty steadily sitting there with only some mild interruptions for over a year at this point. In short, people are very interested in this pairing. If you haven't already, please do follow on social media to keep up to date, and also just to come over and chit chat about fandom. It's a good time, I swear. Also, if you're interested, we do have Shippaween shirts available through the month of October. The link will be down below if you want to celebrate Shippaween all year round. We're gonna have to come at this pairing from a couple of angles, as shippers are coming at it from multiple angles as well. So we're gonna start working from the film verse and then work our way back into the comic verse. For while this pairing is by no means new, what is new is the amount of attention that has been drawn to it, and the audience's receptiveness and willingness to examine it in this light. Indeed, some have come out of this film calling it a romantic comedy. This ship can exist in many different types of fandom, from fluff to introspective to kinky. Indeed, people who have not even seen the film or read the comics are being drawn to this ship. There's a lot to talk about. While this ship may not be universally beloved, for some it is refreshing to see the level of acceptance it seems to have in general. So, with all of that said, let's take a look. Sony's Venom movie was released to the masses on October 5th of 2018, but before it was released, there was a lot of, if not hype, then definitely buzz and curiosity surrounding it. For due to machinations and deals behind and in front of the scenes, it was made clear that this film would not feature Spider-Man, making it unclear from exactly which angle the film would approach the character. A character firmly rooted in its ties to Spider-Man, though not quite as rooted as some believe. This, of course, greatly fueled speculation and audience curiosity. Most fans knew Venom as formerly using Spider-Man as a host, the originator of the now beloved Black Spider-Man suit, which many are shocked to learn was not well received at the time, at least not when it was first announced. However, when fans saw it, they quickly took to it. But by that point, the backlash had already led to creative teams finding a way to get Spider-Man out of the costume, which resulted in an intriguing period where both Spider-Man and Venom had black costumes, lest we forget that comic book fans have always been nitpicky and reactionary when it comes to canon changes. All of this ended up culminating in Eddie's arc. Venom bonded with Eddie Brock as a villain, and has since cycled through villainy and anti-hero arcs, so there were options as to how this character could be approached. All of this built up anticipation. On top of that, people wanted to see how Venom would look, and how the Brock portrayal would be, as there is contention over the handling of the character in the oft-mocked Raimiverse film, Spider-Man 3. Before the film's release, it was already being memed, and trailers left fans and moviegoers eager to see just exactly how the film was going to come together, which ultimately culminated in massive attendance for this film, which for a time left it ranked as the #1 film worldwide. Now, that does not mean it was universally beloved. In fact, it has proved polarizing, some loving it and some hating it. However, even for those on the polar opposite spectrum about how they felt about this movie as a whole, many were able to come together over one thing: the fact that the film made a very strong case for Venom and Eddie shippers, as the two are by far not only the most developed characters, but their relationship is central to both their characters' arcs and the plot in general. Here we must issue a brief spoiler warning, as to discuss what some found so inherently shippable, we will most likely delve into spoiler territory. So what is it that drew so many shippers to these two? As while some went in primed, this is not the largest comic verse ship. Indeed, it is quite small relatively speaking, and many new works will be prefaced with a disclaimer that they are working exclusively from the movieverse, and have no knowledge of the comic verse. Well, for most shippers, it came down to a dynamic that superseded one of the participants being a gelatinous alien parasite. This film provides the viewer with an Eddie and Venom thrust together and forced to survive, and yet still finds time for them to get to know each other and to become quite fond of one another, developing a callous bro-snark banter style that many shippers have found to be endearing. Shippers were also drawn to how much the two come to care for each other and look out for one another, and how intense that bond is, and many felt that the two were positive forces for each other, both elevating the other, Venom keeping Eddie on track and helping him look after himself, if somewhat pushily at times, and Eddie providing Venom with a whole host of new experiences, opportunities, and self-confidence. The many canonical instances of the two addressing the positive aspects of their relationship were quick to draw people in, as was an on-screen kiss between symbiote and host. But the film does very little to point in another direction, and even the minor attempt to pin it on Eddie's former love interest is half-hearted, potentially sarcastic, and even if genuine, the film so firmly separates Eddie from his lady love that few wish to see them get back together, and others are open to either OT3s or 4s, as Dr. Dan has his own fans, and truly deserves a most understanding boyfriend of all time award. The fandom has been quick to play with many of the different potential avenues one can take this ship down, exploring how Venom is able to partially separate from his host to have a quasi-physical form, something he can do in comics as well. The process of envelopment, the depth of the bond, which is part of the appeal for shippers, the closeness and oneness this pairing innately provides, partners inhabiting the same physical and mental space, knowing each other so thoroughly, working in cooperation as one, and very keenly being able to sense the other's absence. This is explored a couple of ways. Some take a more scientific, intellectual, or introspective approach, of Venom responding to Eddie's body chemistry, and say helping him with his depression, anxiety, or diet, as well as just providing overall companionship, and the two working through different aspects of Eddie's life. And there are some intriguing works that really explore mental health in a positive fashion, as well as works that positively tackle gender and sexuality, as Venom is, in most people's mind, an agender symbiote that must most likely give Eddie cause for some self-reflection and examination. The other route is much more physical and smutty. The two can also of course meet, but oftentimes they are separate. Now the smut for these two can take many forms as a result of this pairing's makeup, which leads to some creative and kinky expressions, including, but in no ways limited to, consenticles. The presence and versatility of the Venom symbiote has led some shippers to get quite imaginative with these two's couplings, and for the most part, those entering the fandom have a sense of humor about this, and an understanding that there are some who will find it odd, but most good-naturedly joke about how nasty and deviant they are, and will share memes about various things such as Venom's tongue, while also enjoying the pairing and what it has to offer, smut-based and otherwise. Now, of course, this pairing, like any, is not for everyone, and some are not ready to hop on board, and in fact, would rather steer clear entirely. For some, they feel this entire ship is built upon a foundation of unhealthy codependence, that there is nothing appealing about literal symbiosis. The fact that ultimately Eddie chooses to live this way is read by these viewers as a manifestation of his deteriorating mental health. Also, the fact that now Eddie must essentially kill to survive is very concerning for some, as despite both participants being intelligent creatures with agency, some feel these two have very much been forced together, and that this ship is a romanticization of negative relationship patterns. Others are very off-put by the kink this community houses. Now, kink in general in fandom can be looked down upon, and kink shaming is nothing new, both within and without fandom. Kink shaming in fandom, if it is attached to a specific ship, can lead to ship shaming, as we have discussed at length. Now that is not to say anyone must like this pairing, and many have a visceral reaction to the concept of these two's coupling, from the tentacles, to the envelopment, to limb control, to organ inflation, self-consumption, and more. There is a lot here that could make some shippers understandably uncomfortable, particularly those already on the fence about smut or kink, especially as not all kink is the best illustrated or worked through. So for those who are not part of those communities or unaware of much of the minutiae around it may simply come across as exploitative and potentially corrupting. This can also occur if one is a member of those communities if they feel that the portrayals are inaccurate, as some see this type of smut as an unhealthy breeding ground for deviance that gives all fanfiction a bad name and should be curbed, and they wonder about what exactly is going through the minds of those writing it. Of course, as always, it is best not to presume an author's intent or judge something too harshly before looking into it, although it must also be stated that once this type of kink takes hold within a fandom, it is more likely ability to proliferate and also potentially get a bit more extreme, as once people see it, it may appeal to them or encourage them that this is a welcoming space for that kind of material. How one feels about that will depend about how one feels about this material, and what one thinks the purpose of fandom is. It must also be noted that this type of kink is rarely the sole type of work being produced in a fandom. As mentioned, even in this fandom, there are numerous other types of work taking place. This fandom simply lends itself better to this sort of kink. This is because if one spends time examining the two's relationship, particularly when it comes to physical and bodily functions, as well as a good deal of people's thought processes involving sexuality, this concept will often come up. The two together 24/7 all the time, and Eddie having certain urges and Venom being party to them. For many, the implications are quite clear. As mentioned, in general, there is an understanding from those who enter this fandom that they are most likely going to encounter some things, and many who object do so from outside the fandom, an outside looking in perspective that can make things seem even more deviant than they actually are. Though it is also fair to say that some within the fandom do wish there was more gen work being presented, and it is of course fair to not enjoy everything that is written, or be made uncomfortable by it. For some, even if it does not squid them out or make them uncomfortable, it is just too odd. Shipping is by no means a mainstream part of fandom, even if it has become larger and in some ways more accepted. However, even within a shipping fandom, there are those who delve in more or less than others. For some, they stick to canon pairings, others to big dominant non-canon ones. Everyone has a different threshold for what they deem odd or beyond the pale. Some find Stony odd, as it is not canon. Some find Jelsa odd, as it is a crossover. Some find Mystrad odd, for the two have not shared a proper scene together on screen. So for some, the pairing of human and alien symbiote is a bridge too far, at least at the moment, as it is easier to fall further and further into fandom rabbit holes the more time one spends there. However, for some, this is a crack ship gone wrong, a filthier example of Dean X Pie, Doctor Strange X Cloak, Jason X Brick, and for them, even with the amount of canon dedicated to this specific pairing, it is still just as ludicrous. As always, ship and let's ship. Not everybody has to enjoy the same ships, so long as disagreements can be handled with respect. Even when joshing one another, there can be respect. Intriguingly enough, this pairing is one that has captured mainstream attention, with many outlets quick to highlight both the fan reaction, and some are crowning this relationship the film's real romance. This occurring with various tones of seriousness, but all with an air of legitimacy rarely granted to pairings of this ilk. These differing perceptions have long been a part of this fandom, for as was mentioned, this pairing existed before this film. This film has simply brought it to more people's attention, and is, at the time of this recording, affording it a burst in popularity that is causing some shippers to merge it with the MCU, others with the comic verse, and some to examine the comic verse for the first time, wherein they find there is much shipping fodder for these two as well, both classic fodder and more recent as well, particularly in the current run of Venom's solo comic series. So let us now take a look at the evolution of comic verse Eddie or Symbrock. Eddie Brock made his first appearance in Web of Spider-Man number 18 in 1986, and made his first full appearance as Venom in The Amazing Spider-Man 300 in 1988. Initially, the two were brought together over their loathing of Spider-Man, and the mental characteristics of the symbiote were much less developed. The communication between him and Brock was more rudimentary and crude, nothing like the full-on snarky conversations witnessed by audiences in the later comics runs or in the 2018 film, and yet the seeds for the ship and shippers were there. The symbiosis, the question as to how much each were in control and how much they depended on the other. Over the years, the codependence of the two's relationship was explored. It also came more into focus that this was indeed a relationship, and the two began to choose to be together, or one may reject the other over differences in opinion, as the behavior became easier and easier to read as couple-esque, and some began to construe it as an alien romance. Indeed, the symbiote has shown itself to be jealous in certain arcs wherein Eddie has a love interest, and the two also exchange pet names. And the sentiment was held by many that, ship-wise or not, the two belong together, as at this point the symbiote has bonded with different hosts, and Eddie has lived without it periodically for significant periods of time, only for the two to find their way back to each other, the relationship growing closer and more nuanced each time. Eventually, the symbiote was revealed to have its own thought process and personality, a concept greatly explored in the modern era. While there had been arcs that dealt with it before, it is now a much more consistent theme, which has created many new comic shippers, as before this era, while existent, they were sparse. This run focuses greatly on the emotional connection / codependence, depending upon who you ask, of these two characters. At this point, Eddie has convinced the symbiote to be an anti-hero more than once, and the symbiote has saved Eddie's life from imminent danger as well as illness, and the two now have significant issues to work through as to how exactly they want to live their lives, as the concept lends itself quite well to deep introspection, which is leaned into in this run, a pattern mimicked unknowingly by those who are shipping solely off of the film. There is a lot there to work with, and shippers have embraced it, as these two are so clearly characters, regardless of the fact that one is not human, or humanoid. These two regularly share dreams now, and Venom has become more compassionate. Well, for Venom, over time. Recent arcs at the time of this recording have seen the two producing an offspring. At least this time Eddie is actively involved, in a way he was not with Carnage, even if he was not initially informed or fully aware, as Venom keeps it from him. But he is fiercely protective of their new symbiote spawn, Sleeper, which of course has been a large shippable moment for shippers, as well as a reminder of how unhealthy these two's dynamic can be for those who are not here for this pairing. It is likely that fans who come from the film to the comic verse will be pleasantly surprised by the continuation of shipping fodder and inspiration to work through. This fandom, on the movie side at least, is currently enjoying its high point at the time of this recording. Time will tell how lasting it is, but whether it has longevity or not, Symbrock has been the main takeaway for shippers, and even for some casual observers. This film has most definitely brought an attention that, if not permanent, will cement this pairing on a fandom basis. The relationship between these two is fascinating to contemplate. Whether one finds the concept of being bonded to a symbiote appealing or not will of course vary. For now, this is a relatively pleasant fandom that can produce deep, ponderous works, intricate smut, and also not take itself too seriously. If this pairing intrigues you, and you want to see how people work through it, then check it out. And if one is not a fan of kinky smut or seriously interconnected relationships, then perhaps stay away. There are plenty more ships out there. Are you guys Venom and Eddie shippers? Did you enjoy the film? What about the comics? Did you think this film was a romantic comedy? How do you feel about smut and kink in fandom? This can be a fun fandom if one is willing to accept it on its own terms. But then again, the same could be said of many ships or fandoms, though sometimes fandom toxicity can override that sentiment. So, today's costume. It's pop art. It's not as complicated to do as it looks. If you want to get really intense, you can add lots of dots and stuff like that, but I didn't have time, and also I was thinking about taking it off, and the horror that is already going to be. So far, this is my favorite Chipoween one though, by far. So I know that some of you are sitting there thinking, SG, it's a little late, isn't it? Well, let me ask you this. Am I late? Or were you early? Subscribe if you haven't already, hit that bell notification so that you never miss a vid, share the vids around, do all of the good things. There are, as always, more videos coming soon, and until then, let's get to the outro. Bye-bye. This has been Shipper's Guide to the Galaxy. Please don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Special thanks to all of my patrons, names on the side, for helping to make these videos possible. There are, as always, more videos coming soon, so stay tuned, for there are as many ships out there as there are stars in the sky.